Order. Will the clerk read the roll or call the roll?
Mayor Johnston.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Haney.
Here.
Councilmember Blatz.
Here.
Councilmember Francina.
Here.
Councilmember Wyrick.
Here.
We have a quorum. Well, as long as I'm standing, everyone rise. We'll have the Pledge of Allegiance. Repeat after me. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Robin wants to make a public.
Okay.
Mayor Johnston? On the consent calendar, I'd like to pull that for discussion.
Okay. Before we go to consent calendar, I notice we don't have public comment on here because of a special meeting and a workshop, but I think we still will take some public comment fairly briefly. Do we have any cards? Yeah, we do. Okay. Robin Gerber.
Thank you. Thank you, and I didn't know wasn't supposed to do this, but I appreciate you letting me do it.
No?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I'd hoped to talk to you about this at the last meeting, but the agenda item didn't come up. But I'm here to make a plea for professional accountability in the running of City Hall. Tonight, you're doing the important work of prioritizing. I also hope you'll keep in mind that, in my opinion, the city lacks professional leadership. Steve McClary's report on the fire, let's talk about that first, consisted of little more than a timeline of actions, which at the least might have been broken into issue areas. For instance, communications, coordination with agencies, deployment of city staff, recruitment of citizen service, as contemplated by the ordinance. Other than better use of social media, there were no proactive ideas in that report. Even worse, the city manager sought to make the city's performance look somehow better by comparing it to Fillmore. Let me put aside the unprofessionalism of disparaging a neighboring community in a public document and just say that I care about our city, our community, our neighbors, and what Mr. McClary is doing here. Now, if you want to talk about other cities, let's talk about Pismo Beach, a city of about the same size, where the city manager focused on digital communication to inform citizens and monitor their concerns. Some of their ideas can be found at the end of this letter, which you have, and the National League of Cities website it's full of best practices for small cities and towns. In another small city, Seat Pleasant, Maryland, near where I used to live, IBM's Intelligent Operations Software provides an overview of city operations across all departments. Public Works, Code Enforcement, Police are connected to enable multi-department decision-making, event coordination, and communication that improves operational efficiency and quality of services. Perhaps this might help, for instance, the problem that was noted in a letter to the OVN on Friday about the permit delay issue. These are a couple of ideas I found, and by the way, I'm not trained as a public administrator, not paid a relatively high salary and benefits to be proactive about our city. We elected you five to be in charge, to oversee a professional, efficient city operation. I personally don't believe you currently have the leadership to meet that goal. But at least the city manager must be given measurable deliverables and deadlines by you and be held accountable. Let me say one more thing. Maybe some of you are wondering if I somehow have something against Steve. I don't. I think he's a perfectly nice guy. I really don't know him. My problem is with government. It's especially with government right now because you know what? How people think about government starts right here with you, and it goes all the way up to you know who and what's going on at the national level. In small places, in small towns all over this country. Show the people in this city that government works so they believe in us, in this democracy, and in you as representatives, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Do we have other cards? No. Okay, with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to either the city manager for, oh no, we're on consent agenda, right? Okay. Bill, you said you wanted to do something?
City clerk is sending something to you
What's this?
as I look your way.
we take comments on, are you going to pull something off and they're going to
Yes, I was going to pull the 1A, the only item on the consent calendar. I was going to pull
Okay,
it for
well, then that would
discussion.
coincide with this, then I guess. Okay, so we are pulling the consent item and making it a discussion item, right? Okay,
Yes.
okay. And I have one card for comment, but you want to go ahead with what?
Well, I'll just start out by saying the declaration of emergency, certainly as you look at the code, requires specific findings. It involves specific powers delegated to the Director of Emergency Services, who is the city manager. And that suspends some certain checks and balances that are otherwise inherent. And I just wanted to have a discussion of whether the findings really are there to justify, I think, because you have to justify continued emergency, as well as the fact that the resolution as presented states things like, for example, that a fire continues to burn in some areas, which is not a finding that I can vote for. So I just wanted to have a discussion of whether we're really justified in continuing the emergency.
Okay, well, let's go to the city manager.
From staff's perspective, the threat of the emergency still exists because mainly of the existing threat of mud flows and debris flows as a result of the impacts of the fire. The council member is correct. The resolution should be amended to describe the current conditions, in which case I think it would be adequate to simply say in that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th paragraph that the city council does hereby find that there is need for continuing the existing emergency declaration as the city remains in a severely affected emergency situation due to the damage and resulting harm caused by the fire. So I would suggest that we strike out the words "as the fire continues to burn in some areas." But again, I would repeat our assertion that the reason why we brought this forward is to be able to give me the powers as the emergency services director to act if we did get into a situation where we needed to immediately take action as a result of like I said, the ongoing conditions from the fire, which really at this point, yes, it's out, but the threat of debris flow and mud flow.
Okay, well,
Is it-
before we take the public comment, Bill, is your point you don't think there is a continuing emergency, or that you don't think it's properly justified and we may not get
Well,
an approval?
a new emergency can be declared at any time.
That is correct.
And the problem I have with that reasoning is that that situation could continue for years.
That is also true.
And obviously, I don't think it's appropriate we be in a state of emergency for years.
I would agree with that.
Okay, and the reason this item is on here is?
Well, because we're still in the rainy season, and although we haven't seen any rain, but again, if we suddenly had a downpour and we needed to immediately activate resources, I would be able to do that under my emergency powers. The council member is correct. We could declare a new emergency, and then hopefully that would then meet the test of meeting the emergency declaration. Of course, the council would have to ratify that after the fact.
Right.
Okay.
Well, having seen how quickly things can change in Ojai, I would support continuing with this. Because I've seen floods in Ojai where we're locked, it can happen very quickly, and we are in the rainy season. Is there some legal problem with this?
Yeah, that was my next question of the city attorney, is this,
Because it
There-
seems like things could change overnight.
One key to bear in mind is that the council, if approved, wouldn't be so much declaring a future emergency may occur as they would be declaring that the existing emergency from the fire and the resulting debris flow potential still exists, particularly as the Public Works Director is continuing to do some debris flow prevention measures, relying on the emergency powers, thereby expediting the approval process for contracts, including the council's recent approval of up to $85,000 for the projects that were listed in that item. Under the emergency powers, the usual formal bidding process can be avoided for projects that are appropriate within the emergency declaration. The Public Works Director is presently relying on that power. If not continued, then that would be a point to consider.
Mr. Mayor, just from a legal standpoint, once an emergency is declared, who then says, do we take affirmative action to say it no longer exists, or does it always stay in place?
The statute requires the council to revisit the declaration every 30 days
Okay.
If not, and thus it terminates either upon a declaration by the council where it's over, or else by operation of law if not renewed within 30 days.
Okay, so you're asking us to renew the declaration of an emergency for another 30 days?
That's correct.
Correct.
Does that answer your questions, Bill?
Well, yeah, I guess, I think we've heard from everybody, so I would move
Oh,
that.
just,
Oh,
we
there's
have one card
Oh,
here. Pete? Come on down,
I'm sorry.
hiding there in the shadows, into the light.
Thank you, everyone, for your time on this very important item. It seems in the world that we've inherited, there's an environmental emergency every other month, and which is even worse than the political man-made or the political disasters that we're also seeing lately. Ojai can and should lead the way for sustainable technology and clean energy that has relevancy and is current to the 21st century. To borrow the sentiment from We Are the World, there's a choice we're making. We're changing our own lives. It's true we make a better day, just you and me. So by making those choices, becoming a part of the mainstream in conversation and the choices that we make and how it affects where we live.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you, Pete.
So, thank you. Motion order?
Motion is in order.
Yeah, I would move to adopt the resolution confirming the continued existence of a local emergency due to the Thomas Fire with language as amended, with amended language amending the resolution as suggested by the city manager. And that is by default only for 30 days, right? Correct. All right, that's my motion.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Okay, do we need a roll call on this matter, or is it okay to just, without objection?
Given that we will be seeking FEMA funding, I would suggest a
Okay.
roll call.
Okay, please call the roll.
Mayor Johnston?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Haney?
Yes.
Councilmember Blatz?
Yes.
Councilmember Francina?
Yes.
Mayor, Councilmember Wyrick?
Yes,
Okay, motion carries.
thank you, sir.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
With your indulgence, I just wanted to ask, I had proposed to council a methodology for trying to go through the prioritization of the tasks, and I wanted to make sure if council was on board with that, then I would ask if we could get all those in at this point. If we're not ready to do that, or if we want to talk about other means, then we could wait until we get to that item. But if we are going to go through with getting everybody's responses, we wanted to start tallying those while we were discussing the next item.
Okay.
I have mine.
Yeah. Well, I have mine marked up, but I'm not sure anybody else could read it, but why don't we do this? We have one item that's not part of what we anticipated as a workshop.
Sure.
And the process we follow could be part of our workshop deliberation. So let's go ahead and take the one discussion item, and then we'll come back.
Very good, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, what do we have here? A demand letter, Ojai Valley Sanitary. This says 2 members without name. I wasn't one of the 2, so whoever, or is this something that the staff is carrying, or is it, or one of the 2 people who put it on the agenda want to?
The two council.
Okay, you guys are the 2. Okay, who would like to carry or introduce this?
Well, again, what was requested was whether we have direction from council to prepare communications for us to consider. That's really, I think, the limit of this discussion is whether we could limit it. I think the best thing to do is to limit that, to just simply say, do we want council direction to prepare at least one letter, and I would say more. I mean, in other words, a letter could be a demand letter, it could be a request letter, there could be various versions of a letter. I would be perfectly I would think that's fine. But I think it's in order for us to give direction to prepare the letters for us to consider in a future council meeting, preferably the next council meeting.
Okay. Discussion or motion?
I've got a question. We already have taken the position that we're not going to require a letter from the sanitation district to issue permits.
The will serve letter, that's correct.
Okay. So what letter, what are we talking about here? I was a little confused into what letter you were talking about.
Okay.
The issue-
Through the chair here.
Sorry.
We have one question, and the other question, I mean, the issue of a demand letter, is that the proper terminology? I mean, that sounds sort of legal.
It would depend on where the council wanted to go. One option would be to request, how does OVSD intend to comply with the relevant laws? The other option would be to demand that they comply with the relevant laws. And then, depending on the response, the council could consider initiating litigation in closed session.
Yeah. Hence my suggestion for different versions.
Okay, so Paul's question is what exactly,
Well,
why it is?
the difference is that before January 1st of 2018, when SB 229 went into effect, the position of the cemetery district was that despite the clear intent of the state law that went into effect of January 1st, 2017, that there was ambiguity in that, and therefore they didn't need to comply. And they were still going after our citizens trying to collect money for connection fees outside of the clear intent of the law. January 1st, 2018, a new law went into effect attempting to clear up that language and to make it very clear that special districts there's no carve-out for special districts in SB 229. And they still have not changed either their attempt to collect, despite the new law for the situation where collection fees are waived, nor have they changed their ordinance to be in compliance with state law. And their response at this point, despite knowing what the intent of state law has been for more than a year, have declared a moratorium on all ADUs. Now, I don't want to get into a lot of deliberation on the issue of whether or not that applies to the city or not, because we're not asking for a will serve. But they have been continuing to try to collect from people and threaten people that are our citizens in a manner that certainly as of January 1st, 2018, I think is arguably legally questionable.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, if I could.
Well.
But how do we have standing? We haven't been injured because of that.
Well, there's one issue that I think we have standing. It is in our vital interest, and this is something we can deliberate on. I mean, basically we're asking another agency to follow the law. We have a general plan, and we have a program as part of the housing element of our general plan for the non-conforming program. Each one of those that we legalize contributes to our RENA numbers, is a basic health and safety check for our housing supply. It is a vital interest for us to pursue that program. And this agency is impeding our ability to pursue our vital interest in terms of that housing element program.
Other comments?
I would like to hear the city attorney's opinion.
I'm happy to speak to the issue, and for those members of the public who may not be following it deeply, the underlying issue is that 2016's SB 1069 rewrote the rules for second units in a way that the city has complied with in its second unit ordinance. Last year, SB 229 further rewrote the rules. The city has also complied with that. As part of that discussion, the council, as you'll recall, Councilmember Latz, decided to no longer require a will serve letter demonstrating proof of fee payment from to OVSD for ADUs. That reflected the council's intention that ADUs under SB 1069 were not subject to capacity or connection charges by utilities. But as Councilmember Wyrick noted, that law was poorly drafted and ambiguous. Last year's SB 229 that took effect January 1st states in very, very plain terms that special districts and any other utility lack the power to charge a capacity or a connection fee for any kind of accessory dwelling unit. The other wrinkle there is that the 2016 law preserved the ability to charge the fees in certain cases. But 229 takes that away. No fees for accessory dwelling units. The fees remain the same for other types of structures. In response to a series of inquiries from Councilmember Wyrick to OVSD at their board meetings, they've declared that they do not intend to change their ordinance and instead adopted, the day before the last council meeting, a moratorium on accessory dwelling unit permits for the next 6 months, and buying them time to figure out how to comply with state law. So as of yet, they have declared that they don't know how to comply with the state law by adopting that moratorium. They haven't gone the next step to issue a declaration we're violating state law. The evidence the city has is that they're continuing to impose the fees past January 1st. And then the question for the council is this an issue that the council would like, A, to have a letter prepared for council to consider, and B, to send the letter to OVSD asking how they intend to comply with the state law, and perhaps copying HCD and the legislatures on that letter.
Okay, I think I follow what you said, okay? So my next question is, if there's a 6-month moratorium on ADUs for this fee, how does that impact that doesn't sound right at all to me.
It does not impact the city's permitting process at all. Residents who seek to approve an ADU must get a permit from the city, and they are also subject to OVSD's separate laws. State law has preempted the ability of OVSD to charge a fee for an ADU. Therefore, a resident who wishes to have an ADU approved can contend to OVSD that the OVSD lacks the power to impose a fee.
Okay,
But they would, if, depending on how that fight would go, they might need to go get a judicial order preventing OVSD from imposing their power or threatening to cut off their utilities.
As you say, yeah, right now, we can issue the permits,
Yeah, through the chair, please.
but, I'm Susie,
No,
Chair.
Okay.
But
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
just to clarify, they apparently are still attempting to collect from our citizens, even though we've issued a permit.
And based on their adoption of a moratorium, if a resident was to apply tomorrow for an ADU permit to the city, it would be processed as usual. If they applied tomorrow to OVSD, based on their moratorium, OVSD would say, come back in 6 months.
that doesn't sound right.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
I'm still, so what are we trying to accomplish with this? With a letter such as this? What are we trying to accomplish?
I can
Legally.
speak to that, or
Legally.
legally, it would be to create the record to bring a lawsuit.
For us to sue the sanitation district,
If the council made that decision, which is not on tonight's agenda.
okay?
It could also provide the basis for a resident to bring the suit. The response would be Exhibit A in a resident suit contending, you're subjecting me to this fee, here's your justification. That doesn't match state law.
Randy, you haven't spoken yet. Do you have anything to contribute there, or you want to?
Well, I think the most important thing that comes to light here is the fact that the citizens of this community rely on us to lead and not follow. And the sanitation district is imposing fees on our community that technically break state law. So I think our only recourse, as you have said, is to send a letter that asking them or telling them or demanding them to comply. Now, we can't make them, but having a demand letter demonstrates to them that we're looking out for the best interests of our community. If we need a demand letter to do that, then that's what we need to do.
Mr. Mayor, do you know if the county has taken any action
No.
like
yeah.
this?
No, I
Does
don't
anybody
believe
know?
they have.
None to my knowledge.
If everybody's been heard from at least once, okay, I would like to weigh in on this a bit. I understand the sentiment of what is being suggested, but I have some of the same concerns that I think Councilman Blatz is, if not having expressed specifically, but implied that, what is our standing and what is our policy regarding other agencies? And I have a great concern for us. We wish to have our sovereignty acknowledged and respected, but this isn't our sovereignty in this case. We used to have our own sanitation district that we put into the larger sanitation district, and they certainly have done a better job at upgrading the system than we ever did over the years. So for us to enter into telling other jurisdictions what the law is, unless they're charging us directly, I think is premature, at least when I hear that the state of California is moving even more to clarify a clarification this session.
Member Johnston, no,
Let me.
you've already clarified the language. That's new law.
Okay.
It's okay. Let them finish.
I'm sorry.
The state has a dog in the fight. The Attorney General's office enforces state laws where local jurisdictions ignore, and our citizens certainly have a right. But it seems to me that there's a better way to weigh in on this, and I would be happy to go with either Councilman Wyrick or Councilman Haney, whoever would like to do it, and go sit down with the sanitation district and at least make one more effort at understanding each other and cooperating rather than send formal letters. And I clearly do not want to send anything that makes a demand on another public jurisdiction and in preparation for suing another public jurisdiction. They have the liability. They need to follow the law, and I suspect from conversations I've had that they'd be very happy to respond to any letter we want to send to them side by side. And it just seems to me that we had the school board in here one night, chairman of the school board and everybody, because we kind of, interfered, even though we had a right to get involved, but we actually did some things that made it more difficult for another jurisdiction. I think we should just be very cautious, and this, I think, is not timely. I think we have already protected our citizens for getting their building permits. We have, if it's the bootleg moratorium that we have going, the argument that we need to have these counted so that we're helping our arena numbers, that was really true back when, before the laws changed on second units. But we have, in effect, by some of the state preemption and the actions that we have taken to comply with that, have the potential of doubling the population of our little town that is really pretty much fully built out. So I think we're going to more than meet our obligations under the law, and I don't see any particular reason to be assisting those illegal or uninspected second dwelling units. If they want to sue, they certainly have a right to, but I don't see us spending resource or making threats. So anyway.
Johnston?
Bill?
I fundamentally disagree with you, and for the following reasons. One, the mandates coming from the state include calculations of your arena numbers in terms of the degree to which you're under the scope of some of those mandates. So it's not something that's in the past, it's in the present and the future. Second of all, it's not that we're disrespecting the other agency's sovereignty. They're not respecting our sovereignty. We're talking about our citizens, our housing element. We're talking about something that is understood by state agencies that I've talked to as being illegal, an egregious defiance of state law, and certainly a defiance of legislative intent for more than a year now. So I just don't accept the idea that it's a matter of respecting other sovereignty when they're not respecting our sovereignty in terms of a vital program, clear definition of state law, and something that so egregiously affects our citizens, where someone wants to legalize a second unit under our non-conforming program, spending a few $1,000s to do it and being faced with $16,000, $17,000 of the sanitary district coming after them, even after we've issued a permit. I think it's the opposite. I think it's they're not respecting our sovereignty that's the issue.
Well, I don't want to take up a whole lot of time tonight.
And I'm just asking the letters to be prepared, not for a decision tonight.
Right, but if we direct the city attorney to prepare a letter as an official action, we fired the shot across the other jurisdiction's bow, and that concerns me. But let's go back to the idea of the second units, accessory units being legitimized. The benefit to a property owner, when we had no minimum lot size and a maximum of 1,200 square foot, that was a huge benefit from a real estate standpoint to the owner of that land. If we are now rushing to try to exempt those same people or all the people by spending city money for them to be able to accelerate whatever they're doing to become approved as housing, there was a time when most property owners would be delighted in writing a check for, say, $20,000 and being allowed to take their bootleg property and go legit. The laws changed, so it's not quite the same thing. But why we want to get involved in that at this point, there are other avenues that can be taken to protect this, and I don't see any penalty we are paying. We're supposed to get our arena numbers up, and we're supposed to have zoning and general plans that support that, and I believe we do, and I haven't seen anything to the contrary yet, so I don't know that we've been harmed. Okay, that's my, Randy.
So I just, these are my simple thoughts. The word antagonistic comes to mind. Mm-hmm. And what you're saying is let's not be antagonistic to other agencies. I would agree with that. Mm-hmm. And then let's go back to the other thing that we all live our life by, and that's it's not what you say, it's how you say it. So what we can do is actually write a letter to them asking them to follow state guidelines, telling them why, clearly, what we feel is the points that Bill has brought up, and ask them to comply. I don't think it's antagonistic. I don't think it's a shot across the bow, and at the same time, actually set a meeting up and actually go meet with Jeff, because he's a reasonable person, and go have a discussion. But I don't think it hurts to stand up for the citizens of our community, and I think we can stand up in a less antagonistic way by wording something that communicates our concerns and what we would like them to do to address them. And like,
Mr. Mayor,
it's my turn.
I have a question. Have they contacted us at all because we're not asking for will serve letters?
When we've had conversations with it, myself and the general manager, and I know that they are making regular Public Record Act requests in order to track which permits we have issued.
And about 6 months ago, they sent a letter to the city council, public letter stating that their intent is exactly that, to do a recurring Public Records Act request for all approved permits.
And they continue that in the new year?
To my knowledge, they have continued the requests.
That's correct.
Well, I would concur, perhaps we ask for a request letter to be drafted to consider at the next meeting.
Yeah, but this has been communicated to them. They are aware of our position. So sending a letter, I think that's a good point you make, Randy, as far as not, demand is antagonistic. On the other hand, just telling another jurisdiction what they already know and us doing it officially is somewhat patronizing, and I don't think improves the relationship or adds a whole lot to the fact that if a couple of us went over and met with them and talked one-on-one, that whole to do, a couple weeks ago about de-annexation, which, those of us who know anything about LAFCO and annexations know that was really nonsense, but it was meant to send a message to us. If we don't like the rules of the sanitation district, then we might want to take our responsibilities back and run it ourselves. That isn't entirely without some merit. I don't think we want to be told about how revenues we collect and how they should be used. So anyway, I don't know, it's gone back and forth. I think we're clear.
I just
Paul?
have one more comment, and then I'm going to be quiet. Is there any opportunity, if we're going to write a letter to ask the Attorney General for an opinion as a accommodating jurisdiction where one jurisdiction is saying you have to do this and we're questioning it? Would they give us an opinion letter?
We can certainly ask the Attorney General for a formal opinion whether OVSD's actions to date, hand them a copy of their moratorium, hand them a copy of their current ordinance, whether that's compliant with SB 229. There's a decent chance the AG would respond and say, well, let's wait till we see what happens after their moratorium. I could see the AG saying, well, they haven't adopted anything yet. They say they're going to do it. AG's busy. They tend to find ways out of having to make a political statement.
Well,
But we could perhaps wait.
I'd rather see that letter than...
What if Paul and I went and had a little conversation with them and made it clear to them that they need to get this straightened out, or that is our intention, is to find out what the law is by addressing it not to them, but to the AG? I think that has...
And certainly even if the AG doesn't take it and provide a formal opinion letter, the message could be sent by sending a copy of it to the board of Mr. Palmer, sending a copy of it to the relevant enforcement folks at the Department of Housing
No,
and
what I'm
Community Development.
suggesting is we don't do anything. We just let them know that that is going to be the next step.
Starting
Not
with a
that we're
meeting is another
taking it,
option.
yes, certainly, but, and see if they could just do the right thing. I suspect they're starting to realize that they maybe have been overly restrictive in their interpretation. Bill?
Mayor Johnson, I just want to, again, state for the record, they have no, with this moratorium, by the end of that moratorium, it will be a year and a half since this agency has known the clear intent of the state legislature.
But how does that change anything in the way in which the situation on the ground here in Ojai? The
That's a year
buildings
and
are
a half
still.
of collecting fees outside of the clear intent of the state legislature in a very regressive fashion.
Well,
with
if it's
respect to
against,
housing supply.
they'll have to refund them, I presume, if,
Do they? Do they have to refund them?
No.
Refunding of fees would require a request for a refund by the person who paid the
person
fee.
was standing.
And there are short time limits to file such a
Right.
request.
I remember I used the word
Likely
intent.
90 days.
I used the word intent. The legislative intent was clear.
Okay, this might be a naive question, but why do they need 6 months?
I agree.
They didn't
Why-
answer that in their adoption of the moratorium. It's unclear to me why they need 6 months to develop a way to comply with the law they've known about for 6 months.
For a year and a half.
Well, they've
And
they've
the
known.
underlying intent for a year and a half, but certainly OVSD was aware of SB 229 6 months ago, when Mr. Wyrick, Councilmember Wyrick told them about it.
At the time of the introduction, the legislative introduction, they knew about this law in the last legislative session. They knew about it when it was adopted, last September. They knew about the effective date being January 1st. They did nothing.
Okay, but, okay, how is this for a possible solution to this? Paul and I will meet with the sanitation district and go over some of these very points we've talked tonight. In fact, I imagine they'll probably watch the YouTube on it. And at the same time, Randy, or you and Bill, or Randy, your idea of, less aggressive, but just you craft it without directing our city attorney, which makes it legal, or it seems like it elevates it. Go ahead and craft a letter, and we will go, in fact, the city attorney, if you can tell us what time, what'd you say, 90 days or something? There's a statute or something on collecting or getting a refund?
I
on
would
fees?
double check it if there's a particular rule for that type of special district.
No,
The general rule is
we
90
could
days.
mention that to them, and that could be the impetus for us to step in to protect our citizenry if in fact people are being charged for something that they can't get the money back.
So at the next meeting, we'll find out how your meeting went.
And Bill and
then
I will
if-
draft a letter.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and we won't even have to do it if we can get some kind of an agreement, and if they
Perfect.
tell us that we're, okay.
You'll meet, is there an opportunity to meet with them before?
Well, we'll either try to get there before next council meeting or before the month is out.
Does that need to be made in a motion form, or we're just going to accept the responsibility of doing so?
If no one objects to the idea, why don't we just do it?
Great.
We don't have to have a motion, but we'll figure that, Steve, that this will be back on the agenda at the end of the month.
You wanna go
or
for the
report.
27th?
Either we've reached some kind of an understanding,
Okay.
or we take it to another level, okay?
Great.
Okay,
All right,
great.
my understanding is staff will be bringing it back on the February 27th.
Yeah, at least, and Paul and I may
Okay.
have a report back next week.
Got it. Okay.
Maybe I'm being optimistic, but
Well, we'll see
it
that.
doesn't hurt to try.
Good luck.
Yeah, no, I think it's
Yeah.
important to make that attempt. I think it's important, yeah.
Okay, so we are now at the, I guess, the main point of this, and Randy, you were one that suggested that we try to get our priorities going, and Steve set this up, and I have to admit, I did see some of the emails going back and forth as to what the process was we were intending to follow. Well, let me kick it off with one observation. What we got was probably the best that was available, but it was sort of a laundry list or a shopping list of tasks, some of which are just normal business. So I had a hard time trying to decide between, see if I can find my notes. Everything wasn't equal or of the same level. And so going through and trying to put, 14 comments or as priority ones, didn't seem to me to be a great process. And I'll say one more thing that is only coincidental. I did not know what Ms. Gerber was going to say, but when I saw all of this, and we tried this, we had a little workshop on a Saturday, and we went through a bunch of things, and I came away with a couple of conclusions after watching what happened. One, to do a priority setting thing has to probably be done by sort of a neutral, uninterested professional facilitator. So, because we all have something, our own view and biases, and it takes somebody else to help kind of even that out. That's one. But then I got down to a more fundamental thing that concerns me, and that was a little more intense than I would have expected it to be expressed. But we're in our government classes, we're always taught that there are 3 branches of government and there are checks and balances. Well, in the state government, that's true. But when you get down to county and city government, we have one branch of government called the legislature. And then we have an executive subordinate branch that's either a check and balance in a mayoral form like Los Angeles. They actually are the executive branch. But in general law cities like we are, we're a city manager form of government. And so to the degree that we have an executive branch, and that is the branch of government that actually implements the policies that the legislative branch, approves or directs, it's a kind of a two-way street. I think we as a council have to perform our role in a way where we can both direct the executive what to do and then hold the executive accountable. And I find it very difficult to figure out how we hold Mr. McClary or the city manager department accountable when we have a tendency to be kind of a committee sending tasks over constantly without prioritization, which I think is what Randy I thought I heard a little frustration of how are we going to get through this stuff and why isn't it getting done? Right. So with that said, it just seems to me that, the first step is roles and responsibilities and get some agreement among us and then go to the next step of strategic planning. Bill?
Yeah, I wanted to supply a disappointment in the preparation of the pending task, because as I've mentioned before in emails, we actually do have a priority protocol. And the priority protocol is first in, first out, unless otherwise specified, date certain by council. And I would have liked to have seen the pending tasks presented to us in the priority that protocol implies. So we're looking at, okay, that's what we've got, we don't like how that is, it needs to change. And that's one of my disappointments in how staff presents the pending tasks. It doesn't seem to reflect the protocol we've adopted. So I'm not saying that protocol should continue, but I'm just saying that one of the issues we have is if council gives direction, that ought to be clearly reflected in how the reports are done back to us. And I've been disappointed in that whatever scarce or sketchy protocol we have adopted isn't clearly reflected in how the pending tasks were presented to us.
Okay, yeah. Well, I agree with that, and that's one of the things I think we should probably talk about first, probably. Are there some other comments?
No, other than the fact that we used to get a report that anything we had signed back to staff, it was in the order in which we had given it back to staff, and we kept it in that order with a estimated completion date. And unless the council took that out of order and put something else in terms of its priority, the one on the top always stayed on the top until it was completed. And I think that is a way that we should continue to do it, but we haven't been getting that kind of a report.
Right. That's basically my point. Yeah.
There's one public comment.
And then, Mayor,
Okay.
just one more comment,
Yeah,
please.
Randy.
I think my frustration was the fact that I kept seeing, we had that spreadsheet that actually showed us all of the past requests that we had made to staff to do, and then every council session, we give him 2 or 3 or 4 more to do. And I could see the confusion from the city manager standpoint as to, okay, what is the priority? Is it the one you gave me this week or the one you gave me 2 weeks ago? So that was my frustration is we were the ones that were clogging up the ability for the city manager to actually perform. So I felt that we needed to figure out a better system for that. The other thing is, and I've talked to Steve about this, is when Steve is given a new task, that Steve needs to be able to, at that night, clarify from council, where do you want me to put that on the list? And then the review of the list, there was stuff on there that I saw from 2014, or from
2015.
2015. There was some stuff that was just old. And the idea to me was to go through it and just say, if that's from 2015 and we haven't solved it, maybe we need to boot it and let's figure out what we do need to do. So that's where I was coming from. So I'm not necessarily disenchanted with this. I kind of have a sense that there's some balance here as to how Steve was laying this out. Community economic development is a priority and code enforcement. So I got that. It didn't necessarily answer what we were going to do with all the past items that we have given you to come back to council with. So I'm open to any discussion, and Mayor, I'll allow you to lead it. Bill's comments, I thought, were excellent with what he spread around. So I'm open to anything that's going to allow us to function better, that's going to give staff direction so that they can actually complete tasks in a timely manner and come back to us so that we're not sitting here spinning our wheels and having to always discuss and digest, and because I sense that that's a level of frustration on your part.
Right. When I say we don't have an executive branch, I don't mean to be disrespectful or overly simplifying it, but the responsibilities of an executive are things like research, analysis, identification of options, cost, resources needed, and then a recommendation as to in their best professional judgment, what among those alternatives should be picked. And then that is brought to the board of directors, and then the board of directors could say, we agree with you, option number 3 is the best, or we agree, but not now because of the resources needed, or we don't agree and we think option 2 for political or policy reasons is a better answer. Now that's the way it's supposed to work. But when I go back through the minutes, somehow we've become dysfunctional, and maybe by inheritance and maybe by just not focusing on this. But what seems to occur when we ask our manager a question in a public meeting, the answer almost always comes back sort of, I don't know, I'll look into it, or I'm not sure, I will look into it, or let's bring in a staff person to address it. And what that usually means is that item wasn't really ready for the agenda. And maybe the pressures were requiring them to put it on the agenda before it was ready. So when we get into that sort of thing, we really need to say to ourselves, the way we set the agenda up, if it's not ready for prime time, we don't do it. But at the same time, we should have a deliverable, something that we can measure. It should be dated, when it's supposed to be due, maybe a progress report if it's a long-term or a more complex issue. And it needs to be substantially under the authority of the city manager to be able to carry it out. Then we can hold the executive office accountable, and we can start to work our way through. And I think that the executive office probably would be happy to start knocking stuff off the list. But since we don't do it that way, and there seems to be I don't know whether there's a timidness or an intimidation from us to the staff, but this idea that, well, what do you think? Well, what do you think? And we end up in that. And then we go back, which I think everybody's getting a little bit concerned with, and certainly the staff who has to process this 2 and 3 times. So, Bill.
Yeah, just to extend what you just said, Mayor.
You what?
I would like to extend what you just said to amplify it, because, part of that is when we have, say, for example, on the waterway standards, we said, look, that needs to go back and be reviewed in terms of cost effectiveness, because that wasn't in the deliverable that we had from the Planning Commission. And yet we've seen when the Planning Commission had no projects to process, they just keep canceling the meetings when in fact they did have, that would be the time to do that kind of thing.
Right.
So there's an element there of I hope we can walk and chew gum at the same time. In other words, these tasks sometimes involve delegation, and it's not you work on one thing at the expense of everything else. The things are juggled in terms of how they need to be processed in a more structured fashion. And that's one thing that struck me. Other things like, for example, changing the VMU category from industrial commercial zone to a special district zone, that probably takes a few minutes of a text amendment to change,
If it's already agreed upon, and has that been recommended?
Well, I mean, it's one of the assignments from a while back, but it's an easy thing to do. Yet it hasn't been done, and probably because other things were a higher priority and looked at in some fashion. So that's why I was attempting to get at the idea of categories and first in without the categories. But I do hope that we can look at the whole process rather than just trying to assign priority numbers. I really agree with you on that.
Well, they're
I'm sorry. One other thing that we need to throw into the process also is the public comment period. Because that's another thing that actually takes away from being able to act quickly. So we ask staff, an item comes to us, it's agendized, it's discussed, it's sent to staff. Staff comes back with their take on it and their review. Then we open it to the public. Then the public comments on it, then we open it to council again, and we public on it, we discuss it. Then the next thing you know, we send it back to staff to make some more clarifications. I mean, I think it's just inherent to this form of government, the fact that it's gonna be slow, it's gonna be cumbersome, and it's gonna take some time on some issues. But there are things that I think that we can agendize and say, let's just move, and let's just move, and let's just move. And that's when we can actually delegate to the city manager, who in turn can delegate it to each of the chairs of his divisions and say, we want this done and we want this done by this date. And that gives him clarity, and that allows him to hold his staff accountable. So it's accountability from the public to us and then us to staff, technically through the city manager and the city attorney, and then them holding their staff accountable. I think we can all do better at it.
Yeah. Well, in principle, when you have your priorities and your strategic plan, your general plan is sort of your long-term expression of your values and your goals, and your budget is your annual declaration of your priorities as to what you've funded, and then the day-to-day meetings has to do with the urgency and general feeling of the council of juggling priorities. I don't think we use the budget that way. At least we didn't this past year that I've been on the council, so that would be one place to start. But let's go back to what Bill was saying, and I see kind of a pattern of behavior, or, I guess of behavior, where, let's use the water-wise thing. We get a report that's, again, another laundry list, with a little thought put into it and some comments, but no recommendations, leaving that all up to us. And not even, the staff doesn't want to spend a lot of time pricing things out if we don't want to do it, so they want to hear from us, which of these do you think is a good idea? But it seems like that work should start at the lower level. The reason you have a commission, any of the commissions, is they are advisors to this body, and they should register their recommendations along with staff recommendations. First they do it, then the staff will weigh in on it if it's financial, and then it comes to us, and we say, well, good idea or bad idea. But it seems like we end up being sort of a co-equal or even a subordinate to some of the advisory groups that are supposed to be helping us. And then we say, well, what do we think? And then we send it back to them, which is what you're referring to, this kind of circle. So a lot of it has to do with roles, responsibilities, and our process. And it seems like maybe our protocols, which still show Sue Horgan as a member of the council and mayor, I think it may be time we visit that and clean it up. And I think the staff has done quite a bit of work on it. So maybe that should be our first priority. Not that it's the biggest one, but it'll be the ground rules by which maybe we can advance the rest of this.
In looking at the process, I really think we need to go back and have the list of what staff is working on now, its anticipated completion date, and how many projects staff can really handle. If we've already loaded their plate with as much as they can handle, and we start throwing more at them, that's not going to serve anybody's purpose, because nothing's going to get done then. But I totally agree with the concept that when it comes to us, it should be in final form. It should be in final form for us to act on. We should either thumbs up or thumbs down on it, based on the priority of the project, based on how much work you have. But I don't think we should be sending stuff back and forth. If it comes to us incomplete, we ought to vote on it and vote a no, and be done with it, and then move on. And if it's ever ready again, it can come back to us. But I think too many times it comes to us either piecemeal, or it comes to us in a half-baked fashion, and then we try to massage it, figure out what we think should be done to it, and then what do? We pass the ball back, and it doesn't work. I think it needs to come to us in a far more final form.
Yeah, and I would just give another example of that. We've had on the books for a while now the missing lot coverage standards that we wanted the planning commission to take up. And again, I think they've canceled 2 meetings now because they didn't have projects to process. That would have been the opportunity to take something up like that in order to get recommendations to us. So I don't understand a little bit of how that's working.
Well, that's part of the executive function. To carry, once we, our relationship is through the city manager, and the city manager does the research, does the analysis, he has his priorities, or should have priorities, based upon superior day-to-day knowledge. And when it goes to commissions, the staff, the department of, we haven't had a planner, right, for a while, or a community development director that's
Part of the
full-time. Well, Matt's, Winiger is doing it, but he's a temporary. But those are the kinds of things, the work program for the commissions should be steered by staff and city manager direction based upon what he hears from us. If that's important enough to do, then they shouldn't be canceling meetings and not doing it. Or maybe we need to take a look at who it is we're sending them to. Okay, who wants to, or Steve, you, by all means.
Hey, you got an earful there?
Couple comments. So actually, well, no, I really appreciate the feedback, and I don't think anything that I'm hearing here tonight isn't anything that I would disagree with. I think the mayor and several council members have said it well. We've also struggled a little bit trying to work through this. I completely agree with Councilmember Blatz in terms of trying to get this back on paper in a regular way back to council. I think that will help everybody, including the public, in terms of where we're going and what we're anticipating here. One area that I wanted to jump into, and maybe this is premature, Mr. Mayor, but I just wanted to get it out on the table. And believe me, I hear the feedback in terms of coming back with complete staff reports that have staff recommendations. I understand that, and hopefully you've started to see some improvement in that area. The one area that I would want to get a little bit direction from council is when we have matters that are really purely within the policy realm. And a lot of times we will receive requests from 2 members of the council to get something on a next agenda. And it's really just at the policy level. So I want some clarification from council in terms of how staff should be handling those requests and what your expectations are in terms of the staff report. Because typically I think that would be something where we would be looking, honestly, in this case I think appropriately, from the council to give some direction to staff in terms of where do you want to go with this pure policy issue.
Yeah, Bill?
I would agree with that. I think the burden should probably very much be on the requesting members of council if we were requesting something, we provide some of the background, and then the rest of the council thinks whether or not that's worthy of further action or not. And I don't think we should expect a staff report for every single thing that council requests. No.
Okay, but I know I've had some conversations with the city manager over this on things that I had put on in the past, and he is under the impression, and this may be going to protocols or rules in the past, that it needs to be both prepared and submitted by the city manager. And at least organizations I've been with, there is a distinction between policy requests coming from individual members of the board and administrative recommendations coming from the staff or from the organization. Managers should not be endorsing an individual council person's idea of a good idea, and they shouldn't be opposing it until the idea is presented, and then they may chime in with some concerns as to whether it's a good or a bad idea, but just as additional information. On the other hand, everything that once it's put into the executive branch should come back from the manager. And if we distinguish between those two things, then it should lighten the workload a little bit on the manager, but in the area that he's spending his time, and give him more time to be getting results, holding people accountable. Because this basically goes back to management by objective, the old Peter Drucker thing, and that's what I was saying. A measurable product, a date for delivery, and it's not something that's beyond the ability of the person responsible to deliver. So if we give something to the staff and don't give them the resource to carry it out, whose fault is that? That's ours. But if we provide the resources and it doesn't get done, now we know accountable. Bill?
And I would just agree with you fully, and the city manager, that I think the distinction would be if we're talking about two members saying, here's a policy objective that we would like to see, have the council discuss. Well, that doesn't require a lot of city manager work or staff report if we're simply introducing a policy objective to get a sense of what the council wishes to pursue it any further.
Right, with some sort of, discussion or background
Exactly.
in the submittal, saying,
Exactly.
for these reasons, we think
Right.
the city should, okay?
Right, and
Yeah.
then the staff burden would be based on what action this council as a whole took, on
So-
that policy proposal by one or two members.
Okay, so what it sounds like what we're talking about would be an item, I think, that is coming back to us, I think fairly soon, the protocols.
Yes.
Now, here's a case of, are they coming back for us just to update without any real discussion? Doing it at night, it probably is best that maybe that should be a topic, and that we really get into it, and the staff, a full participating member in the discussion of what it means when we say we want it done this way. Paul you mentioned like first in, first out, which I always think of from my accounting classes, FIFO, but that's on the pricing of the value of products in the warehouse type of thing. But I think what you're saying is that in the queue, when you go to the bank, everybody gets in line, and then you're next, you're next, you're next.
Right.
But we have found at the courts that there is a need to have more than one window, and one is an express window for the simple stuff, and one is for complex litigation goes to a different window. And maybe we should be dealing the same way. So it's not, some things take longer, and if everybody waits for the complex thing to be done before the next issue
Right.
gets taken up, so that's where the city managers earns their keep. They figure out how to do more than one thing at a time and then blend it, and if there's a problem, they just give a report back. This isn't going to get done. So we're not all struggling to say, wait a minute, I'm next in line, because I may be next in line, but what I have on my mind is not anywhere near as important as what the council as a group thinks. Okay?
And Mr. Mayor,
Yeah.
what happens is, all of a sudden, 6 or 8 months or 9 months down the road, we say, whatever happened to that?
Yep.
And we have no idea, and it's just been put on a back burner, and that's where it stayed. And maybe that's where it should have stayed, but maybe it shouldn't have. But without having that kind of feedback and actual hard copy of what is being worked on, it's hard for me to know what's the next step we should be taking on another project that comes before us.
Like a status report.
Right.
Randy?
I agree with that 100%. I remember I asked, how did the dog and cat issue get on the agenda? And it was like, well, because we talked about it 4 months ago. And it's like, really, 4 months ago. So that's an issue that we need to deal with. The other one, I think, is the gray area that we create, too, that when we take specific items on as a council person, and then we address it to someone in the public, well, we're going to go work on something together, and we're going to go solve that problem. And then that problem, one, is never brought back, or it's not brought back in a timely manner. And then what it does is it actually stifles the ability to have a conversation about something that's pertinent, like, let's take affordable housing. You and Bill has said that you were gonna go do something about it. So what it's done is now we don't talk about affordable housing in the community because we're waiting for you and Bill to come back with what your, with what your idea is on that property over here on Montgomery. So I'm just saying.
Well, that may be what you're doing. I guess I need to clarify that for you, but go ahead.
But my thought, but again, we do that also. Again, we're probably our own worst enemies when it comes to doing those. Jumping now, solve that problem in a little group, in a small group crisis management team, and then we create the crisis because we never get it done. Or we stifle the conversation of fulfillment in this community because we don't bring it back in a timely manner. So again, I think that's figuring out where to plug those into the manager's handbook of efficiency. So,
Right, yeah, and our protocols, because I think there's a difference between an individual member of the council having an interest in a particular subject and volunteering to help out on that. As Bill has a concern with accessory units, I had a concern with the idea of an experimental thing on the Montgomery lot. I think Paul and others had a concern with dealing with the school district. In some cases, it was official. In other cases, it was just getting a green light to spend some time on a project.
Right.
But that keeps kind of going back to our procedures and how we do it. And there's a difference between the standing committee and the ad hoc committee and the volunteer group. So once we get the expectations, to the staff as to what we really want to come back, we've put it on laundry, what I call the laundry list, that, and it just, I don't know, when I scroll through that stuff, then I can imagine the staff feels the same way. But that's where, again, the manager's office has to be bird dogging these things. It's not, that's the index that tells us what's out there. We need to figure out why it's not happening. And if there's something that the manager needs from us, then that should be the conversation.
One of the challenges, quite frankly, that I'm facing is, we have our list, so to speak, and we can talk about how we get that straightened up and squared up, but let's just agree for a moment that we do have a list and that we're trying to get to that list. And then what will frequently happen, and I'm not criticizing anybody for this, but we will get requests, usually off the dais, to add an agenda item to a future council meeting. And as a good example, today I received 2 requests today for new agenda items. One of them actually had been brought up before council before, so it wasn't completely new. But the request was to put that on for the next agenda for February 13th. And of course, we're actually in the final stages of trying to put that agenda together. So, and I think at that point, I have to apply my discretion as a manager in terms of, what is the urgency, what is the timeliness here? Is there a deadline that's going to pass, for example? That was the request that I received today from Councilmembers Wyrick and Francina about a Fannie Mae grant, which has a deadline coming up before the February 27th meeting. So that's a request that I received today, which appears to be timely to go as soon as the February 13th agenda. So that's a bit of a challenge when we get it at this stage of the game in terms of how do we incorporate that, how do we manage that properly. So love to get some feedback from council on that. And again, I think back to everybody's points here, once we have established what our priority list is, if we then get consensus from council that we have a new item and it's going to the top of the list, hey, take this customer out of the line and put them at the front, then at least we have acknowledged that means that the person who's going to be next is now the person who's going to be next to be next.
Well, I think, you're touching on an important point. A lot of times in council, when they say, well, how much staff time is going to be be required for something, we say that, but we don't really size it up. And I'm not saying the staff had to do it. I'm just saying that's the thing that we should consider. We do not have a mayoral form of government here, and maybe that's a great thing, because I sure don't want to have the job. But the city manager does have that job, and we as a council need to not only give lip service to it, we need to recognize that our rules were set up to try to control some kind of an agenda, and everything can't be equally important. And we get, right. I know we all get bombarded by our constituents. In fact, I think I get bombarded by probably 9 non-constituents for every 1 constituent, and I talk to all of them. But at some point, you just have to say, time out. We can't do everything and immediately. And this idea of that there are tons of cash and we have to go for grants, there are deadlines, but at some point there should be deadlines for our council meetings. And I know that if everybody thinks they have an important thing, sometimes we set our own deadlines.
So I don't mean to pick on this particular example, but here I am faced trying to get something on the agenda and in the packet, and then if I put something out there without any analysis or background, again we're right back to where we were. But at least, well.
But but if you have the things that are coming from, say, 2 council people, that is sort of a policy question that you have no fingerprints on, you haven't even seen it before, and they want it on the agenda right now until we get the protocols reviewed, they have a right to do that. And so if you stick it on just as it was submitted, it probably doesn't go very far unless they've really done their homework, whoever they is or they are.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Bill?
Yeah, precisely.
Yeah.
I think the burden in this situation is for Susan and I to prepare the material, no expectation that the city manager has time.
Yeah.
And then the council gets to see whether or not it's an opportunity, based on the material we can put together, worthy of action or not, but it's, there should not be an expectation of a lot of staff time
Yeah.
in that situation, or any, frankly.
Right, and I think we need to establish some deadline on when we need to cut off those requests as well. Again, we can always, depending on the urgency or the
Yeah,
matter.
again, it goes to kind of the procedure and protocol we want to follow. It could be just, reserving a slug line on the agenda so that the matter can be
Correct.
heard and enough information to make it legitimate for discussion. And then the materials that would support the request come later. Now, I thought, and maybe the Brown Act changes that. I see our city attorney squinting a little bit, so maybe we should ask him about
I
that.
had that same,
The Brown Act requires that the item be on the agenda.
Right.
It doesn't require that there be a staff report. It doesn't
Right,
require
okay,
that there be
that-
analysis.
okay, okay.
It does require, however, that if a
Adequate.
staff report is created in rather, any document that is distributed to a majority of the council must go to the full council and the public, rather be available for public review at the city clerk's office.
Right, and the slug line, as I would refer to it on the agenda, has to be sufficient to give the public adequate understanding of what it is that's going to be discussed, right?
Correct. The standard is a brief, no more than 30-word description of the item, sufficient to apprise someone who might want to come to know whether they should come or not.
Right, so.
And
what-
then if SEEK was involved, you have to state that, and if a commission determination is involved, you have to state that.
Okay. So, but the manager's office knows those conditions, so as long as you get that much information, then it should be done, and it's not your name or a recommendation from your office, it just simply, Mayor Johnson is asked, or Councilman Wyrick is asked, and the information will be furnished to the council by, and then put a deadline on us for
Yeah.
getting it out. Okay?
Very good, thanks for that clarification. I think that'll help a lot.
Okay, so,
Susan, did you?
Susan?
no, I think it's been handled, yeah. So you can say to us, you can say, tell me, what do you call it, a slug line?
Yeah.
Yeah, a placeholder, maybe that
First I
sounds
heard of
better.
that.
Takes me back to
That's
my
the old newspaper
AP
talk.
days. Yeah, I was perfect for my old career.
Okay, so we need to
Yeah, I
provide
guess
you.
with technology, they don't have.
I knew what you
Talking about
meant.
a line of type, what is it, what is it?
Yeah,
called
yeah,
now?
it is, yeah.
Yep.
The aluminum
Yeah,
ones?
a placeholder so the matter can be taken up under the Brown Act. That's the most important part if we have two members of the council. And then we all need to respect the fact of time and the lateness. And what did they say? Just poor planning and urgency doesn't necessarily increase importance of the topic. And so from a time and, management standpoint, we all need to be more aware of that, I think.
So I normally we wouldn't do this, but I think maybe just to kind of, I think it might be helpful here in terms of just kind of fleshing out how we're operating. The other request that I received today from the two council members was for a resolution to come forward on the nuclear non-proliferation treaty. Now, again, that could be very simply put on as a slug line again. Now that one sounds fairly simple. Again, we could probably just put that on, get the basic materials, and then forward that to council and public. So that's how we can handle that going forward. And again, I just have to throw just a bit of caution here, just in terms of, and I know it's already been said, obviously we can't fit everything on the next agenda, and there is discretion, and again, that's the city manager's job, is to try to sort through those things in terms of which are the most timely, which are the most urgent. But sometimes that's going to mean me saying, I'm sorry, we're not going to be able to get that on the next agenda.
Of course.
But we'll let you know where it's going to be
That's
scheduled.
fine, yeah.
Right, Randy?
Just one thought on that, it seems to me something like that could be put on the consent item. And
Yeah.
you have the ability to make that decision, because that's not something that we need to have a full council debate and a public debate. It's posted, it's read by the community. Obviously, the community would be behind something as simple as that. So I don't know why it has to be a discussion item. Put it in the consent item, and let's move
But,
on. And take that responsibility.
Okay, my suggestion, Steve, is, it's your responsibility under the code to set that agenda up. You do it in collaboration with me as the mayor, and any two members of the council have a right to make their request. When that stuff comes in, if we follow the idea of dividing between policy and administration, and where you need to recommend and where you just step back and say, have at it, guys, and then you put it on the agenda to meet the Brown Act requirements, when we then I believe under our protocols, when we come to review agenda, we will set our priorities for that evening, and the things that we think, well, if we don't get to it, we don't get to it, and at the end of the agenda, then at least it's out there, and sometimes we surprise ourselves and get through a few of those items.
Right.
And then if it has to trail, it trails, without anybody worrying too much about it. But, by putting the responsibility where it belongs, we're saying to you, we want analysis, we want options, we want recommendations over here, and you have a right to expect for us, when we bring something up that's a policy matter, to do the homework.
Right.
We don't have any staff, so obviously we come down and we'll talk a little bit, but a lot of it, it won't be really neat and tidy probably, but we got word processors and we can kind of get the general thing down. And if it's not adequate, I think the council will say, okay, continue the matter. We're not going to deal with it because we don't have enough information.
Exactly. And another good example of Randy's point, for example, this MOU coming out of Supervisor Bennett's office, that just goes on the consent calendar. Just.
Yeah, just formality, okay.
Yes.
While I'm thinking of it, did we arrange that we have Tuesday night permanently if we need it? Did we change?
We have asked, the one conflict that we're having was with the Building Appeals Board, and they are working on finding alternative dates so that we can keep our Tuesdays clear, Tuesday evenings
Yeah, I think that
clear.
would help a lot, so that wouldn't be a big deal, even if we had to meet 2 hours, for, just to keep the things moving.
Yeah, consider that has been done.
Yeah, I'm very happy to come on, if we need to.
And the Building Appeals Board was very conciliatory in working with us on that, so I appreciate that.
Because one way to start cleaning some of this stuff up is maybe we meet once a week for a month or so until we get it, we kind of get the thing sorted out as the things we don't really care about anymore, if there are any, and knowing that you're going to be, we're all going to be accountable on a fairly short fuse, we'll get a lot more done, I think. And I think most of us would rather not meet every Tuesday, so the sooner we get through it, the better off we'll all be.
Are there people in the audience who don't know that we started at 6?
Okay, yeah, well, in that case, when we started, this is a workshop, so there wasn't a public comment period, but I am going to, is that with the agreement of the council, those of you who didn't realize we started at 6, I've got about 4 cards here, so if you'd like to, let's see, are they all on number 3?
Michael Healy was first.
Okay, just a second, I got 2 more comments. Is this on item?
Those are general.
Yeah, we might not,
Okay.
I have no item. I have just something I want to present.
Okay, well, we'll just do it. Michael Haley, come on up, Mike.
That door's open.
Good evening, everyone. I'm gathering, my comment was about the priority process. And I'm gathering from listening to you, the first thing that you have to do is figure out what the problem is. And I guess you know that, but I'm gathering that there's 2 problems. One is that staff has too much to do. And number 2 is there's so many things that just aren't getting resolved. All these things are coming at you and they're not getting resolved, at least some of them. But I'm trying to figure out, so that's my first suggestion is figure out what the problem is, and be very clear about that. Maybe you are, but it wasn't to me just listening. And I do think that the FIFO thing, I think you have to look at content and what matters to the public and what matters to, what's more important than you've only got so much time. And you've got to set some priorities in terms of, my suggestion, what I came to talk about was the water issue. That's, to me, the most important issue facing Ojai. I think housing is probably second, and those are just my opinions. But I think if you're just doing this first in, first out thing all the time, you've got to set that against how important is it to what's happening in Ojai right now. And if you have an issue or a project that has to do with water, that should go ahead of some other things, I would think. And that's just an example to give you an idea of what I'm thinking. But I think that to set some priorities that have to do with what matters the most to people in Ojai right now would be an idea, all right? And the other thing, well, the water, I forgot what the other thing I was going to say. I wanted to mention that, the other thing is that the culture here expects you to be responsible for all kinds of things that you're not responsible for. You noticed that, huh? And there's like 25,000 people out there that you really don't have any authority over, but they look to you to solve their problems. And that's a problem because you get sidetracked on a lot of things that you really can't do anything about. The sanitation district is a good example of that. You don't have any authority over the sanitation district. I'm not saying you shouldn't have feelings about what they're doing or not like what they're doing, but their boss is the state. So if they're going to change what they're doing, it's going to be because the state comes down on them. And I was a director of Parks and Open Space in Napa County. We had constant problems like that. I was dealing with the BLM. I was dealing with federal agencies. Bureaucrats get bureaucratic, and they dig their heels in sometimes, but you know, the only people that'll make them change are their boss, just like here. So that becomes a priority in terms of how much authority do we really have to do something about this issue. And if we don't have a lot of authority, maybe we shouldn't be spending as much time on it as maybe some other things that we can control. So that's another thought about how to make your priorities about what you're dealing on. So I see that I'm out of time, so those are my suggestions.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Bill Miley.
For the record, my name is Bill Miley, and I live at 919 North Signal Street. A couple of things, listening to what you're saying. I think it's exciting the council has lots of things to do. Right? Also, I think
Too exciting.
I think it would maybe be nice occasionally to do like the planning commission and be able to cancel a council meeting because you have no business. Okay, that's a joke.
I look forward to that day.
All right. It seems to me that maybe one issue is the city manager's clock. City manager has just so much time. But maybe this city manager's clock has flexible hands, and so it goes beyond 24 hours occasionally. But I wrote this down. It seems to me that there is so much time that the city manager has to put in for reoccurring responsibilities. Happens over and over and over again. City council meeting, planning commission, designated time, designated effort. And then there's the responsibilities that are one time. And so it seems to me that you take the city manager's time, subtract the reoccurring stuff, and that's what the city manager has left. And maybe there's little left. I don't know. So I would think that maybe something like little red wagons, there's like 12 little red wagons out here. And each project is put into a red wagon and it's labeled. Now, it could be a basket or whatever. So you know how many red wagons there are. I would think also you might consider, if not, this is not new, that there'll be a protocol page, a worksheet that gets developed in response to a request by the city council, by the city manager, to tell you how much time he thinks it's going to take, who's going to be involved and how much time, how much of his time, how much of the attorney's time, and think of the tiny house thing, and you asked for an ordinance to be developed, but I didn't hear anybody say how much time it was going to take by the city attorney to do it, okay? And then bring that back, and then you will find what the work amount, the load will be to get this accomplished. And maybe the time that, the flexible time and discretionary time your city manager has isn't enough. So you have to do it differently. Anyway, that's the.
Thanks, Bill. Promise me you won't bring red wagons next week, okay? I know you love props, yeah. Peggy Lucera?
I thought this was going to be a full house. I didn't realize this was a special meeting, but I had been asked to join a group to brainstorm housing for the fire victims who are still without housing or who have been housed for a week or two at a time, have been on couches, and they're still, in effect, homeless and unsettled and moving from one place to another. Vaughn Montgomery of Greater Goods brought a group together to try to see if we couldn't come up with some creative solutions. And I just said that I would announce at the meeting that we're looking for, any Ojai Angels that have an extra room or a place on their property where an RV might be pulled in, to step forward and contact Vaughn Montgomery at Greater Goods. I also wanted to suggest the possibility, since the Ojai Valley Inn and some of the other hotels advertise Ojai as a bohemian artist community, that they establish an artist in residence program where an artist can apply and come and stay there in what would otherwise be an empty room for a month and create a project. I see someone doing a little dance in front of the Oak Grill at the inn, or writing a song and playing it for guests. And it would be a way to reinvigorate the bohemian aspect of Ojai. So, and the last thing I want to say is only peripherally related, and that is that we've established that the first Eco-Education Conference on Fire Resiliency will be held on November 17th. It'll be a one-day conference. There will be 4 to 8 talks. It'll be in conjunction with the Ojai Valley Museum's exhibit on the Thomas Fire and fires past. We'll have a panel discussion there. I've arranged to have the gallery at the Ojai Arts Center for an art, music, poetry exhibit called Fireworks. Christine Golden has offered to help curate that. I have a feeler out to Donna Granata. Karen Bosson is going to help me set up the conference, and I'm just looking forward to telling you more about that in the days and months to come, but mark November 17th on your calendars for Ojai's first Eco-Education Conference on Fire Resiliency. Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy. Your timing was impeccable.
Mr. Mayor?
Paul.
I just have a question as a comment that Ms. Lucera had made. Have we relaxed our standards or anything for residential RVs on private property?
We have not, Councilmember.
Mayor Johnson, may I follow up question to Mr. Blatz's comment?
Sure.
Interestingly enough, since we just discussed the state of emergency, there is some latitude for temporary waivers under states of emergency, I believe. I don't know if it extends to that, but I think it might.
The emergency declaration and underlying code sections is powerful enough to allow the manager as director of emergency services to make such a declaration. I don't believe that has been done yet.
So there could be some temporary waivers to address just that, done administratively.
Okay, that's something to be considered, but
Just
no-
pointing out the potential.
right, yeah.
The option.
In the absence of any structures being lost in the city, and knowing that our code enforcement program is not all that draconian, I think people probably under the self-help rule are already doing some of that, but
Is
there's...
that the ask forgiveness rule?
Well, that's been going on in Ojai ever since
Yeah.
I've been here, so I don't think we need to, we don't need to promote it particularly. And there's a big county out there with a lot of space where they did have the losses. So anyway, but it's a nice invitation to any citizen who'd like to help out someone who is in need. Okay, McKinley Barnes.
Hello.
Hello.
So y'all know I'm McKinley Barnes, and I was at that same meeting. I've been at other meetings, and I want at first to thank you all for doing this. I don't know the protocol, but I imagine you're not paid enough for the time that you put in, having heard what I did here. And sorry I wasn't here at 6. I thought it was 7. So, yes, no structures were lost in Ojai that people lived in, but they were lost in other places, and we are having this conversation about housing. And the people who lived in those areas, many of them were either underinsured or uninsured and renters, and yes, they're still looking for places. So couple of things. One, if there's some follow-up on any progress that may have been made in changing of tiny home standards required in Ojai, I'd love to hear any of that follow-up feedback. The other is, this is such a big issue. I mean, it was a big issue before we had a fire. It's hard for the creative types to live in Ojai. There is not enough affordable housing. That is not a surprise for any of you guys to hear. So I've written this up so that I get this right. So I'm here to ask if it's possible, the members of the council to appoint a temporary committee to determine the immediate housing needs in Ojai, and that this committee host a forum or a series of forums with a facilitator to discuss and address affordable housing in Ojai, including alternative building methods. This city has a wealth of informed experts with respect to these issues, and our town is also in dire need of solutions for housing in the wake of the Thomas Fire. So when I say, yes, nobody in Ojai lost their home, but these people spend their money in Ojai, and they are a part of this community monetarily. And I want to help them. I was totally unaffected, but that doesn't mean that I have no responsibility for doing my part. So this is my little part. We have some incredible experts in this town, unbelievable experts. And I want to speak a little about building materials. At these forums, I think we need to talk about alternative building, cob homes, straw-built bale homes, all of these things, earthquake-proof, fire-proof. All this is going into our oceans, as we saw in Montecito. We have one world here, one earth. It's all of ours. If we're building more toxic homes on the top of these places where we lost homes, that's a problem. I know that's outside the city, but we need to talk about this and be able to build sustainable, beautiful, cheap, non-toxic homes. They're fireproof.
Thank you. Okay. Where are we, Mr. Manager, on the workshop here for the? I would make one comment to everyone. I'm hoping. I know that Supervisor Bennett brought this issue up when we had our town hall meeting about housing, and I'm hoping that the same message is being taken to the county, and they actually do have a program for the unincorporated areas. It's not there's certainly more land. It's just a question of cooperation of the people who own the land and the jurisdictions. We have not, I don't believe, kicked up our enforcement effort trying to deal with RVs or anything. So I think it's as usual in town, and people help people. But Ojai is only 4.5 square miles and almost fully built out, and there are limits to what we can do, but that doesn't mean individually we can't do something. If you have an extra room or something and you want to invite someone to live with you.
And the
Okay.
tiny houses are coming back on the agenda. Yeah, there's follow-up, yeah.
Okay.
So, Mayor, where do we want to go with this?
Oh,
Well-
are we going to go back to this list?
Well, do we want to, go
I'm
through
saying I
that?
thought we were going to talk about protocol, come back with protocols first,
Okay.
and then maybe submit these lists to the city manager if we choose to, but,
And perhaps Mr. Blatt's suggestion of an updated status report,
right.
tools we need.
Yeah.
Well, there's a saying on priorities that if you have more than 3, you don't have any. You got to focus. And so maybe one thing we all could do individually is look through the list and the issues that are near and dear to you. I know on mine it's budget, air, quality, and water. But if we all submit that to the manager, I think we do need 2 things. We need to get our protocols, thoroughly discussed so that we're working well together and efficiently. And then the other is the strategic thinking and planning process, where you have the areas where you want to see results, which is what we should be defining. And then we need to have the administration, the executive office, retail this throughout the organization. And by that I mean having everybody who works for the city or works with the city getting their piece of the action that serves those results areas. You know, like one of the things Bill and I are doing, it's a small thing, but we're trying to be innovative and do something that, small though it may be, it would be in perpetuity if it works. We have a meeting with Santa Paula next week, Bill. So we're doing that, but that's in support of what's been brought up here about the issue of affordable housing, workforce housing. Bill's concerned with housing too, with the issue, and what Paul and I will do when we go and try and persuade the sanitation district to come to some sort of explanation or agreement with us, that would be in support of that action. And then I know you guys are working with the cultural heritage people. That to me seems to be the way it needs to work. What is it, Lewis Carroll? If you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. The Mad Hatter's Tea Party, and I think too many of us are March hares. We're late.
Well, Mayor, I'm sorry,
I
Susan.
haven't said anything yet.
Okay,
Are we-
what?
are we-
You haven't?
No.
Who was that
No,
woman that
but
spoke a
are we-
minute ago?
What are we on? Are we going to have a time to discuss individual items on this list?
We can.
Questions I have?
Well, I'm not sure what that question is
Well-
discussing it. We're talking about, prioritizing. That doesn't
Okay.
necessarily mean
Okay.
that we're going to debate
Okay,
anything.
Is it okay if I have a turn, or do you want to add?
No, you
to-
certainly should have a
Well,
turn.
But unless
Maybe
he's
you'll be
weighing,
next, okay?
if he's weighing into the matter at hand, I'm going to bring up something different. So
Well, the matter, first of all, let's just talk real simply about water. We were given a thing of 3-2-1 to measure ourselves on this list. If every one of us didn't put a 4 on water, we weren't very wise. And then going back to Mr. Haley's comments about water, it is interesting, because I've actually heard on this, in this council chamber, that we're not water purveyors, so therefore we don't really have to worry about water, someone else does that. It wasn't from this group, it was from a prior group, but I find that very interesting. But I find that very interesting also. If water isn't the number one issue and from us and through the community, and I don't know what isn't. I'm driving to Santa Barbara on a daily basis, and I'm going out the 150, and it's just frightening. It just is frightening. So there's a lot of groups in this community working on it. I think it's going to behoove us as the center to try and corral all these groups and bring something positive out of it, but that's going to be down the road. That's all I wanted to talk to you regarding
and that's
water.
going to be on the next
Okay,
agenda.
well,
Okay.
we were trying to bring it through as
Yeah.
to what our process is
So-
going to be. And then tonight, we do have the list, so if we're ready to go to the list,
Right.
I could go to the city manager. How do you want to handle it?
Well, again, our thought there was just to get something to get us off the ground in terms of coming up with something where we could at least rank these and then put that into a list so that the council could then take a look at that, then massage it and then see if they wanted to make adjustments from there. And then, of course, that would give us something to work with. But I'm also hearing that perhaps there needs to be some further work done on the protocols as well
And reporting.
and reporting.
So we're not going to do the thing where you look at these, somebody's going to spend half an hour adding up our numbers.
We can certainly do that. We're ready to do that if council wants to engage in that tonight.
Okay, why don't we ask, if the council wants to put the numbers, we don't have to sit here and try to do it tonight, but we could all make a commitment if we understand what we're doing. I had a little difficulty with how to do it, but
I don't think that's I don't think to me, that's not necessary. I think we can express I think we have been expressing what we think are priorities, and I'm ready to weigh in on a couple of items. Can we do it that way? Or is
Well,
anybody?
I think that, Susie, we could be all night if we actually start breaking down each one of these. I think we should submit these to the city manager, let him see what all 5 of us have put together in some form of priority, and then we'll offer ourselves the opportunity to actually review each one if we need to at that point in time. I think there's gonna be a lot of us that have a lot of things in common on this.
Okay.
well, our results area are pretty well emboldened, the report we were given, community economic development, and then you can think of these as examples of things that might be done. There may be other things we should do and get rid of some of these. Code enforcement, clearly, if we say we want code enforcement, I don't know how much we want to afford, and that's a budget issue. And so when we do the budget, which is going to be, we're getting into that process, and in fact, that's a good question right now. When are we going to have a calendar as to what to expect and some kind of a
By the end of this month.
Yeah. And
And we
does
have
that-
mid-
and
and
we
we
have like a handbook or something that says how that's put together so that we as the council people will know how it's coming to us? Because the last year, we had what was presented as a budget. First time it was balanced, but it was structurally imbalanced. Then it came back and it was structurally balanced only because the staff or the finance office, like cut the tree budget and cut this, cut that to squeeze it in.
Right.
That process through protocol we should talk about, because there is probably the most meaningful way in which we set the priorities. Bill?
And as part of that, we were going to have a mid-year budget report.
That's coming on the 13th.
Okay.
Okay, and the audit?
I believe those will be ready for the February 27th.
Great, okay.
It just missed the deadline for the 13th.
Okay, it's my turn? All right. So here's an example of two items that have been on the agenda as far back as I can remember, in 1994, okay? That's when I became involved with the city. That was the first time I ran, okay?
You were a child.
I was just a child. Okay. Safe streets for all users of the road, and for some reason, that's called EE Other. And then further down is really the same thing. Where is it? Prioritize complete streets projects.
Okay.
Okay, now, if we were a bigger city, we would have a bicycle pedestrian coordinator that would have handled this 20 years ago. Okay, there's no reason why this should even be on this. If I keep telling Greg Grant, if you don't have time to do it, then you must come to the council and we must figure this out, because a bicycle pedestrian coordinator, we've had untold updates on our complete, it's now called it used to be called the Bicycle Pedestrian Master Plan, 1997, okay? So and we're doing a piecemeal thing. We're working on sidewalks now. And I have great fear that by the time my term ends, we still won't see even a pilot project for bicycle routes, safe routes to school. Those are health and safety issues. The children in this town are being chauffeured every morning. Hundreds of SUVs are driving kids to school because our little country roads can't handle bicycles. That should have been, maybe can we hire a bicycle pedestrian coordinator? Can Greg Grant find the time? I'm going to be tomorrow at 2:30 at another Complete Streets meeting. I've gone to these meetings for years and years and years now, and many of the original people have given up. Kelly Pasco, for example, who has the mob shop. And it is now at a critical juncture because we've got more and more business, the Ojai Valley Inn. There's more and more bicycles on the road. Okay, the people are, and they don't have any clue how to, you can always tell because they're on the wrong side of the street and they've got, they're looking over their shoulder because they've been led to believe that the streets are safe. I know I'm rambling here, but why can't this be handled? Why can't this be handled? That's the question I think we as a council need to ask. Why is it that we can't get this complete?
Well, by way of, this is sort of sending things in circles. I understand your frustration, but that's a transportation issue, and there's a transportation element in our general plan, and when was the last time it was visited? That should be our job and the Planning Commission's job, and I haven't seen it, and I understand there is money that would be available to start addressing some of those things on the general plan. Then the next step is it, the budget, and how much money do we spend on that versus something else, and it's just competing. Bill?
I didn't mean hurry,
I didn't feel hurry.
All right. This has been one of my frustrations as well, but I think sometimes we need to be more careful students of process. And one of the frustrations I've had with the Complete Streets Committee is that there is code language allowing adoption through Planning Commission procedures of specific standards and guidelines for our streets, for our street overlay program, et cetera. That's never happened. That's one way to implement. And that also lays the basis for grant applications. If those guidelines we have default guidelines that have never been deliberated on in terms of recommendations from staff or Planning Commission to enhance, to accomplish just what you're talking about, and to provide a better foundation for it. So In other words, I think that rather than just defining the policy goal, the Complete Streets Committee and the Planning Commission need to be better students of the process in terms of using the code language that's available that's never been implemented to accomplish just those guidelines.
So you're saying that adopting the bicycle pedestrian master plan was not enough?
That is a general plan amendment that has to be implemented by specific programs. And we have the ability to do specific programs in our code that has never been taken advantage of. I don't
All right,
remember the
well-
code language in my head, off the top of my head, but I've shared that with the Planning
This
Commission.
needs to be brought up.
I have, multiple times.
Okay. All right, I'll meet with you.
But I think that's an example of, we have to look at the process rather than just the policy goal. What's the process for implementing those goals?
Okay, but
And be a student of the process.
But on the other hand, you could hire someone to
Well,
do it.
Yeah.
Right, at some cost, and then the priorities as to how we spend our money. My biggest concern, and I know that I'm old-fashioned, but it seems to me safe streets begin with safe pavement. We're putting in sidewalks, and a certain number of sidewalks, very helpful, but it's very expensive, and we're using general fund money to do that while we're not paving our streets. That doesn't mean that that would preclude doing what you're talking about, but it does need to be all part of the transportation element of the city in the general plan. And that's where, you know, we don't seem to ever go back to the big picture and what our values and goals are, which needs to be done at some point. If we hire somebody, it seems to me to review the general plan would be a good start for the,
And we just did. We hired somebody to look at an update to the transportation.
well, we hired somebody as a community development director, and we had one before, and let's hope they work on that.
Well, there was a contract that led to the master plan that we adopted.
For the complete streets, you're saying?
Yeah.
Yes, right,
Yeah.
right.
Which was adopted under the relevant code section cited by Councilmember Wyrick. That was adopted under the Planning Commission code sections that allow, they're under the design review permit sections that require that any project subject to a design review permit comply with the Complete Streets principles, which was the Complete Streets master plan. Not saying that it can't be further refined, but at least it does exist.
Right, and that's not kind of what I was getting at when I'm talking about the overall, like, we used to have a road department, not the city, but the county had a road department. They still do. It's a subset of the Public Works Department, and they have an inventory of all their streets, and then they have a projection of the life expectancy of the repairs, and they can show at what point the streets will be paved so that they are safe. Okay, the Complete Streets is to have more than just pavement, but to have bicycle lanes and to have sidewalks. In a way, sidewalks in some places compete with bicycle lanes in a rural area because you're not supposed to ride your bicycle on the sidewalk. And so when we actually improve the sidewalk, we have less pavement to designate as bike trails. All of that is usually done by most communities as part of their general plan review of the transportation element, is all I'm saying. And if we always avoid, we go directly to task, individual tasks, and then wonder why we have this very long list and the things aren't getting done. So I know it's difficult and it's daunting, but when was the last time we really did the general fund? I know we're supposed to report once a year, and I think we're supposed to update every 5 years.
No. The only obligation is to update the housing element every 8 years. There's no obligation to update the rest of the general plan, with a couple exceptions every so often on the safety element.
Okay, so that's the legal requirement. I'm talking about the policy requirement of looking at our values and our goals, and we haven't done it for quite a long time. I don't think we're in violation of a law, other than maybe the law of common sense, of why are we constantly in this kind of a dither, and it's because it's hard, and because that part of it kind of gets put on the shelf, and then we have someone, no, I won't use names, but we all know, they come and they point to the general plan, and they say, that's your constitution, that's what you're supposed to be living by, and it says here, all development requires such and such. Well, in 1985, when they used the term development, it meant bulldozers and subdivisions. Today, we have a couple of people who have devoted a good portion of their life trying to work with that and work it out. But that really does need to be revisited. It wouldn't take a lot of time to clear that up so that we don't have a fight over it, or not we, but there's not a controversy over it. So anyway, I think we got to work at it from both ends. We've got the list of stuff that's on here that we're frustrated with, but we never go back and say, you know, what is the, we have more.
That just,
Has he gone home for red wagons, or is he? Okay, Bill, we'll get back to you. Okay, Susan, go ahead with.
no, I'm just listening.
Yeah.
And I'm going to meet with Bill tomorrow, he doesn't know it yet, before the Complete Streets meeting.
Okay.
Because we're going to go to the brown bag lunch.
Oh, yeah, I'll
Maybe
see you there.
afterwards.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, thank
Right.
you.
You're gonna be busy tomorrow, aren't you?
Yeah, it looks that way.
I saw Mike Flood today. I asked him if he was gonna be there along with Steve, yeah.
All right.
Look what you're missing out on, Paul. The brown bag lunch.
Those are
You
good.
clever devil.
Mayor?
Yes, Bill.
Just a comment on getting back to this pending task. I don't mind filling this out and turning it in. I would request that the results be compared to the protocol we have now, which would give us some sense of, the protocol we have now, however flawed it is, first in, first out, unless otherwise designated by council on time certain. See how this comes out. I would be perfectly happy to see how this comes out and then compare it to that protocol, what we have on our existing protocol, so we understand what we're changing. That's my only request.
That went over my head, but it sounds good.
Well, the question is, ask Steve if he understood it.
Clearly understood. Yes, thank you.
Okay, Steve can explain it to you and me.
It's
I
all-
wouldn't,
it's
I
all
wouldn't
right.
know. I
Bill and I will explain it to you.
It sounds good.
I guess I'm not as familiar with the protocol as Bill is, so I just.
Oh, and
Doesn't-
one thing in this, I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor. This might be a good time to bring this up. Obviously, we did not identify items on this list that are either routine or required by law. For example, we did not put on this list, the time that we'll be, calling for the elections. Obviously, that's prescribed by, state statute. We have to do that for, within a particular amount of time. So, we have those things in the back of our minds too. And so this is almost the, this is the non-routine, non-rote items. The other thing that I have, and it does vary from meeting to meeting, but I've been trying to follow a rule of thumb, at least in terms of future agenda planning, of trying to put on, 5 items. And by items, I mean items that will really likely get discussion, not items that are likely to go to the consent calendar or be routine. And it seems like we can typically get through about, even on a good night, 6 or 7 items. So I'm trying to leave a little bit of slack for either those timely items that come in or the additional requests. And so, again, long-term, we've been trying to build the agendas going out with about, putting about 5 of these on a meeting going out. So just to give you an idea of kind of how we're pacing it.
Okay, well, as a suggestion as a way forward, so we don't just do what we usually do, and then the later it gets, the less efficient we become. That's scary.
So I understand that council members will submit those to me, and I will compile that, and we will
Our names?
compare it to the,
Should we name it?
No.
Yeah.
But how about this, to try to simplify, so, what Bill was saying, to do I think a vet check or something on, between the protocols and this, which I think is a good idea.
Right.
So why don't we discipline ourselves to go through this, and if there's some items that you believe are combined, then combine them, and come
Sure.
up with your top 10. Well, each of us will have our top 10, and then let him take a look at that and see where we are, and see if we have, how much agreement we
I've
have.
already marked it up, so why don't we can just, we'll do that next. I already
Okay.
marked it up according to 1, 2,
Yeah.
3.
Right, I'm just saying, if we all do that, then
We
they
could do a
can
top
take
10
it.
as well, a supplement.
Here.
okay, so everyone will just give me their top 10.
Let's put our names, so in case if something isn't clear, how we marked it, they can ask us.
All right.
It's not like we have anything to hide.
I'm not putting.
And those documents will be made available at the clerk's office for public review if required, if requested.
As requested, yes. Thank you.
Top 10.
Don't
is
call
fine.
me, I'll call you.
Okay. Well, I only have 8 right now, but before I leave tonight, I'll get my next 2 for you, and I'll leave it with you.
Very
Okay.
good.
It'll be my tailing assignment.
Okay.
Top 10.
Mr. Miley said he would like to talk to us on this. Is
Is this
Should we-
going to
should-
the city
is it-
manager?
we've kind of concluded our part of this, okay to hear from Bill, and then we'll,
Well, I have a spare one if Bill'd like to fill one out.
hey, don't tempt him.
Shadow
Come on
counsel.
up, Bill. Yeah.
Bill, shadow council member, yeah, I love it.
Bill Miley, North Signal Street. 3 days ago, I wrote an email to the city manager and the mayor. It's about adding something to your list. In reviewing the administrative memo, which was in the agenda, I did not see anything that related to watching the general plan, participating in the county general plan, or something like, quote, monitoring and participating in the process to update the Ventura County general plan, including the Ojai specific plan. I assume that ought to be a moderate priority. Okay. So I followed that up with a suggestion on how to do it. Okay. So I've given some thought about this in a working group to stay up with the deliberations that the Ventura County government is in on the general plan update. I would suggest that the council consider appointing an ad hoc or working group that would be composed of commissioners from each of the city council commissions, citizens appointed by each city council person, enough members so that all general plan elements are covered, with enough members so that at least 2 people can be involved in each element, select folks who have been expressed interest and experience in the element, and that it would be chaired by a city council member. The city council would create a mission statement, focuses for, goals, procedures, protocols, et cetera, reporting back. And then once appointed, the council would set a time and place for an orientation, a charge, protocol papers, background information, and then setting up time, schedule, and procedure for reporting back to the council and concluding with some form of recommendations, commentary, suggestions, and problems. Anyway, I think that ought to be one of the priorities and a goal which I don't see on the list.
Can I ask, Bill, before you leave, do you understand the protocols that the county are using?
Do I understand the protocols of the
that
county?
the county is using? In other words, how you, how they're breaking down the conservation element that,
Yes.
Are you asking to create a body that simulates what the county's doing?
No.
So that I mean in a good way, so that we can assign specific people to go listen to or attend specific meetings. Is that what I'm
Yes.
hearing that you'd like to do?
Yes.
Okay.
I think the city ought to be assertively involved, procedurally involved, policy involved.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Mayor Johnson?
Bill?
We have contracted already for, in cooperation and collaboration with Seafrog, for monitoring the vital interests of the city and the Ojai area plan in particular. I really appreciate your mentioning this because we haven't had a report.
That would be
from
good.
group. And I think we're overtime to do for a report of what activities have been done in response to our commitment of funds under that contract. The Environmental Defense Fund people also kicked in additional support for that. It's a law firm that specializes in these kinds of issues. It's already been engaged, but we are overdue for a report. And I think that given that existing commitment, your suggestion makes a lot of sense in terms of maybe we have a particular, we haven't really stepped up in terms of getting a report to the status, and also having like an oversight group for that contractual arrangement among staff or city council, and maybe we need to think about that.
There was
So there's-
one line in my email that I did not read, and it said, I know other groups are involved in some ways, especially those of their particular interest, and I know about Seafrog.
Right. But
And I think the more, the merrier. But this, I believe our city needs to have a policy decision and an asserted citizen involvement to make sure that we get the best out of that revision and the best out of the OI plan. Because I have heard that they're talking, some of the supervisors, several of them may be talking about reducing the air contaminant levels.
And Bill, that is precisely what we have committed funds for already on a contractual basis to look out for and represent our vital interests in that
The
respect.
more the merrier. I think the citizens ought to be involved,
But we do
kind of
need a
like I
report.
suggested. Okay.
I think.
And I'm willing to help.
Mr. Mayor?
Steve?
We'll certainly follow up on the suggestion to get a report to council on Sea Frog's efforts. I think that would be definitely a good time to do that. And also did want to mention here that our staff has been attending the general plan update meetings at the county, and we can bring a full report forward to council as well on where that is at. So I'll make sure that those two things happen.
Okay.
Thank you, Bill.
Okay, where are we? You have anything, anybody want to?
No.
Exhausted for tonight, and so everybody will get their 10 points in short order, and by next week, you'll compare that with whatever influence the protocols have over on the, what is that, the first in, first out issue, is that why?
Right.
And see where we are. And
Yeah.
then-
So-
And we probably should set a workshop, a real, like in the morning sometime where we're all
Okay.
fresh, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, I've got my
You
direction.
okay?
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, is that it?
But what about, don't we have a future council? Or is it already?
This is a special meeting, we got a council
we've
meeting
made
coming
our
up next
requests,
Tuesday night.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would, if I could, just very quickly,
go, Steve.
just make just a couple of very quick announcements. One, I wanted to announce that we have hired Luke Connolly as our new Community Development Director. He is coming to us from Monterey. We are very excited to have him on board. He will be starting on February 20th. The other announcement that I wanted to make is that the county has announced, and sorry, let me just pull this up on my phone here real quick. County of Ventura has announced a series of post-fire debris flow community safety meetings that have been scheduled, including a meeting that has been scheduled in the Ojai Valley for Saturday, February 17th. It's at the Oakview Community Center at 18 Valley Road. We will post all this on the city's website. But just a quick heads up to the residents of the city of Ojai, from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. on Saturday, February 17th, they will be talking about what they call Zone 10, which includes residents in the areas of the Highway 33 corridor, Miners Oaks, Oakview, and the city of Ojai. So for residents who want to hear specifically about their area, that would be the time of the meeting for them. Of course, they could attend any of those meetings.
Okay, thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Okay. Meeting stands adjourned. Thank you, guys.